Hey everybody, Aaron Bishop here with another Bishop's Blurb. Some 50 days after Passover comes a holiday that is called by several names in the Bible. In the Old Testament, this holiday is called by the name of shavu'ot, a word that simply means weeks. In the New Testament, this holiday is called Pentecost, a word that in the Greek means 50th. This holiday is one that's been celebrated since the Torah was originally given, and in the Torah this day commemorates the covenant that was made on Mount Sinai that we read of in Exodus chapters 19 through 24. Well, in the book of Acts, this day is recorded as being the day when the Holy Spirit was poured out on the early church, leading to the spiritual gifts being awakened in the body of Messiah. When we read of this account in Acts chapter 2, we read of an interesting visual phenomenon that accompanied this event of God's Spirit encountering humanity. Acts chapter 2 verse 3, "And there appeared to them divided tongues as of fire, and it settled on each one of them." Divided tongues as of fire settled on each of the disciples gathered in the upper room. Now, often when we read this story, we see this and we think of this as a unique event never before seen in human history. But surprisingly enough, it's not unique. There's another time in the Bible where something similar occurs, and I would go so far as to say that it is the very same type of event. For this, we need to go back to the book of Exodus to examine the story of that first Pentecost. And we're all familiar with the story of the Exodus, as many movies have been made about it, but it's very easy to put the book down when you get about halfway through, because it shifts to some drier material, let's say. Things like laws and the blueprints to make up the tabernacle, they take up the majority of the last half of the book, and these things don't appeal to a general audience. We want narratives and grand events, especially here in the West. Well, nestled in the midst of these dry texts, there is a narrative that most of us are familiar with. It's the narrative of the golden calf. While Moses is up on the mountain, Israel creates an idol of gold and begins to worship this idol and call it by the proper name of God. Well, God is so upset that he nearly destroys all of Israel except for the intercession of Moses. During this narrative, Moses ends up breaking the tablets that the covenant was written on because the people had already broken the covenant that the tablets represented. Once things are settled on the ground, Moses is invited back up the mountain to reforge the covenant that had been broken in an event that foreshadows the new covenant. It's as Moses descends the mountain the second time after receiving the tablets of a renewed covenant that we read this. Exodus 34:29. "When Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand as he came down from the mountain, Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone because he had been talking with God." Aaron, what are you talking about? How is this anything like Acts chapter 2? Good question. Unfortunately, our English translations tend to mask the verbiage of this verse in an attempt to make it more understandable. But in the Hebrew in this verse, it does not say that Moses' face shone with light. It says that he had horns from the skin of his face. It's because of this verse that many early church paintings and sculptures of Moses depicted him as having horns. Alongside this, the word for skin sounds exactly like the word for light in Hebrew. It's the word or. And so it's often translated as his skin shone, horns from his skin. But what if it wasn't the skin of his face that was shining? What if he had actual horns of light coming from his head? A sight that another author might have described as having, say, divided tongues of fire above his head. You see, Moses had been in the presence of God at the reforging of the covenant, and that encounter caused light of some sort to emanate from his face. Rather than shining skin, I believe the Hebrew is speaking of light coming from above his head like a horn. In Acts chapter 2, on the day of Pentecost, we discover the same thing happening. A new covenant is being enacted, and those who encountered God in a high place then had lights shining from above their heads. In both cases, as we read, the people in question are then given the ability to speak for God. The fires of Pentecost were not new in Acts chapter 2. They had happened before. And when we put these two events together, we find that this light or fire or horns of light above the head of a person is a sign that they had been in the presence of God.